going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. In today's episode, we're going to be doing another MIgardener redo. This is where we take an older MIgardener video and we redo it with better video quality, better public speaking skills, and I'm no longer an adolescent. So today we're going to be redoing how to grow cabbage. And so with that, hopefully you guys are going to enjoy. Let's go. So the first step to growing cabbage successfully is understanding the soil. Now this is where a lot of gardeners go wrong, because when you look at cabbages, you think, oh, this is a beautiful lush plant, it's super green, it's a leafy green crop, it probably needs tons of nutrients. And if you stopped there, you'd be correct. They do need tons of nutrients. But the soil type is really what throws a lot of gardeners off. They actually, because they're a brassica, like a more compacted soil. Not compacted as in like you could make pottery out of it, but they do like kind of a lack of air gaps. And that's because when you grow brassicas, any brassica, but especially cabbages, they're very prone to what's known as root knot nematodes. And root knot nematodes thrive in very aerated, very fertile soil. And so what I prefer to do when I'm growing cabbages is I pick a spot in my garden that I have not yet amended with lots of compost. I will still amend it, yes, I will still amend it with a little bit, but I let my soil kind of compact over time. And that's going to reduce the air gaps, and it's going to allow me to actually help compact the soil around the roots, which has been proven by many, many different soil scientists to actually reduce the risk of root knot nematodes by up to 75%. So what we have done is we picked a bed that we actually kind of let kind of slightly degrade. Again, not a bad thing if you've got nutrients. So we're going to be using a granular fertilizer to provide the nutrients. We are growing in, just aged compost. It's just compost over time will break down and degrade and start to compact. That's what happens naturally. So rather than fluff this bed up and make it absolutely pristine and perfect like we would normally, we're going to go in a slightly compacted soil. And so you'll notice this soil has a slight grayer color to it. It's slightly more dusty and broken down, and that's very, very normal, and it's very good for brassicas. So what we're going to do is we're going to dig a hole and we're going to plant our plant. Okay, we're going to talk about lots more on how to grow these, but I want to show you what we do here. Get 2 for the price of 1. Nice. All right, so what we've done, we dug our hole. We're going to fertilize. Super important. We'll talk about fertilizer in a second. And we're going to plant our cabbage. Now, it's going to sound crazy, but what we want to do is we don't want this to be nice and loose because we don't want to run the risk of getting root knot nematodes. What we're going to do is we're going to take our fist or our palm, we're going to press. We're going to compact that soil around the plant. Now you might be thinking, holy cow, Luke has absolutely lost his mind, and I in fact haven't. This is how you can grow very successful cabbages, and most soil scientists will tell you that to grow the best cabbages, you need a soil that's about 50% more compacted than other crops in your garden. So whereas a tomato, you'd plant your plant, throw it over top, you want that nice loose soil for good root development. However, the roots on cabbages are prone to root knot nematodes, and that compaction reduces the air gaps, which then reduce the root knot nematode, or the risk of root knot nematode, I should say. And so that is a step that so many gardeners do not get. And if you take anything from this video, it is compacting the soil. Now, it is very important to have the right type of soil, because if you do this with clay soil, you're going to completely collapse the soil, it's going to completely suffocate the roots, and it's going to kill the plant over time with things like root rot, because it's going to hold on to too much moisture in the soil. This soil can compact, right? It can compact if I squeeze it tight, but it also still breaks apart, right? That's what you want to go for. You want to go for a soil that is fertile and it is, loose, but it can be compacted without being detrimental and killing the plant. So that's the first thing, is the soil. Now let's talk about fertilizing. All right, so now we're going to talk about fertilizing, which is really important as well. You see, all this growth does not just happen because of magic. It happens because of high nitrogen. Now you have to remember, cabbage is a leafy crop, and the more leaves it creates, the larger and tighter the head can be. And so we really want to focus on nitrogen. Now we are fertilizing with trifecta, which is a 5-10-4. It's 5% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 4% potassium. It also has beneficial bacteria and fungi, as well as trace minerals in this fertilizer, so it's well balanced. I always recommend going with a well-balanced fertilizer simply because it's like a multivitamin. You should be taking a multivitamin. Yes, you might need iron, but it's also not going to hurt you to get some other vitamins in your diet as well, right? So plants need nitrogen. All plants need nitrogen to create leafy green growth, but especially your leafy crops. They focus primarily on nitrogen. So we're going to focus a lot on nitrogen. Now, you don't have to use trifecta. You can use something like blood meal. You could use something like a fish fertilizer, a chicken manure, anything like that that's going to have lots and lots of nitrogen in it, because what we want to do is we want to encourage lots of leafy green growth. Now, you want to make sure that the fertilizer you go with is not going to be so strong that it ends up burning your plants. A lot of gardeners make a mistake of going with like a urea, which is like a 60-0-0, 60% by weight of just nitrogen. It's very harsh. It has a lot of nitrogen, but it's so concentrated and so harsh that it can end up, too much of any good thing can be a bad thing, right? So that's why I like to go with something gentle and well balanced, but it's got a good focus on those macronutrients to help provide that plant growth that we're looking for. All right, so next thing we're gonna talk about is spacing. Now, spacing is really important for your cabbages because they're very small now, but they won't be very small for very long. Cabbages have absolutely huge leaves, and those leaves will definitely trample and overshadow other plants. They're gonna compete. And so what we wanna do is we wanna space our cabbages out about 10 inches. That I find is a really good spacing for me. You can go a little bit further than that if you have the space to afford or if you're concerned about overcrowding. But in my experience with the varieties that I choose, 10 inches is good enough for me. So I'm gonna go out about 10 inches, and then I'm going to have a plant and then another plant. And this way, my plants are close enough to where the leaves are gently going to be overlapping each other. They're not going to be, really tightly crowding each other. But that overlapping is good because it's going to shade out the soil. And as we talk about, having shaded soil is really important. It's going to shade out things like weeds. It's going to help to hold moisture in the soil. It's also going to help to cool the soil down so that the plants are less stressed during hot days. So lots of benefits to having slight overlapping leaves. Just you don't want them having a boxing match with each other. So it's close, but not too close. Now you are going to notice that I'm going from a green to a purple. Now, why am I doing that? Well, that's because there has been quite a good amount of evidence that shows that by intercropping different colors of cabbages actually helps with cabbage moths. Now, cabbage moths will hone in on cabbage plants. They're those white little butterflies that you see flying around. They look like little fairy butterflies, but they're moths, and they will lay their eggs on brassicas. Now, by alternating green and purple, or green, purple, and like a whiter cabbage or something like that, it helps to kind of break up that color variation, which in some studies has shown to prevent things like cabbage moth or at least reduce them. So we're going to be alternating our cabbages, and we've done that for years. And I can really attribute that to a lot of the reason why we don't have as many cabbage moth problems. We've always done that. Ever since I read that study, I thought, well, why not? So we're going to be doing that. And that's something that really plagues people. But if you find that you're having problems with cabbage moths, the next thing I want to talk about is pest deterrent. So with pests, it's super important that we control pests before they become a big problem. And with cabbage moths, it can become a really big problem really fast. And so what we're going to do is we're going to intercrop green and purple to help prevent things like cabbage moth. But then we're also going to use a product called BT. It's known as Bacillus thuringiensis, and it is a beneficial bacteria that you spray onto the leaves of your cabbages. And when it becomes ingested by any type of caterpillar, it also works on tomato hornworm. It works on tent caterpillars in your fruit trees. Very, very, very effective. But it only affects things like caterpillars. And so you're going to spray that onto your plants. You can even spray it on right now. It's totally fine. It's not going to hurt them at all. And then it's going to help protect them. The final form of pest protection, well, there's actually two more. Next form of pest protection is marigolds. Now, in the beginning, we talked about root knot nematodes and how planting marigolds next to other crops can help with root knot nematodes in our intercropping video. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out. It's amazing. It's absolutely awesome. But this video comes back full circle to talk about how we want to intercrop to prevent things like root knot nematodes. Remember how I said we're compacting the soil to reduce the risk of root knot nematodes by up to 75%? Well, you can also help to reduce the risk of root knot nematodes by about 50% with the help of marigolds. Marigolds excrete a chemical in the soil that helps prevent things like root knot nematodes. And so Michigan State University actually did a study on this about, I want to say about 5-7 years ago or so, and it was very, very effective. So we're going to apply those, and we can plant those in just different parts of the garden, close proximity to the plants, and that's really going to help out as well. So you can use that. And then the very final form of pest control is with a product called Tool. It's just a basically tutu material that you drape over your plants, and that helps to keep things like the cabbage moths from getting into the cabbages. All right, so now that we talked about pests, we talked about fertilizing, we talked about spacing and soil, I really want to touch on watering. So when it comes to growing cabbages, a lot of people think that they can be treated just like any other brassica. Now, like kale, for instance, we just planted some kale over here. Kale is pretty drought resistant. It's a leafy green, much like cabbage, but if it doesn't get rain for a week or two, it kind of just is okay with it. It doesn't love it, but it's not really going to suffer. Whereas cabbage needs lots of regular water. Now, why is that? Well, that's because cabbage forms a really tight head, and that head is all leaves. It's about 95% water. Each leaf is independent of one another, but they fold over top of each other to form a head. And the tighter that head is, the more it's important that you get the water into the plant. And the reason why is because cabbages, when they have a very tight head like that and they start to dry out, what will happen is the leaves will shrink, they'll shrivel because they're running out of water. And then what will happen is that head will kind of create a little air gap there. And that air gap can actually steam. And that's why cabbage heads will actually start to form mold or rot in the center of the cabbage. And that's known as head rot, or even like there's gray mold that can affect them, white mold that can affect them. And that's simply from that air gap and that steam being created from the shriveling of leaves. So you want to keep those leaves plump the entire time. Now, I find that like right now we just planted our cabbage. They could use a little water. So I'll find that I'll water my cabbages when they're needed. We have cores in these beds, so about 12 inches down, 10, 12 inches down, we planted, or we didn't plant, we buried our straw bales like we do normally. If you haven't seen those videos, go check them out. And that holds moisture in the soil, which is important, but when the plants need water, we're gonna be watering. I'll find in the summertime, that might be once a week or so. It's not that often, but it is very important to check your soil, know when they need water, and to water them when they do need it, because just simply turning a blind eye to it can actually be a really bad thing for cabbages. All right, the next step to successfully growing cabbage is understanding the sunlight. Now, when it comes to sunlight and cabbage, they really break all the rules. Now, there's an old saying that says roots, shoots, and fruits needs full sun. That's about 5 to 7 hours, whereas leaves needs partial sun. And you might think, well, I'm growing these for leaves. I'll give them partial sun, 3 to 5 hours, no problem. They don't need full sun all the time. You'd be wrong. Cabbage breaks all those rules. Cabbage loves 5 to 7 hours of nice full direct sun, and if you give them more than that, they're not going to complain. This spot right here gets between like 11 and 12 hours of nice full direct sun, and they're going to thrive. And the reason why is because, yes, they are a leaf, but those leaves, the more they can create, the bigger the plant can get, the larger the head can be. And so again, it goes back to, nutrients, it goes back to watering. Leaves are the most important thing to a cabbage. And so the bigger the cabbage gets, the more energy it needs to produce that head. And so giving it nice full sun is so important. Now, if you only have 5 hours, absolutely, it's gonna do fine. But any less than that is really gonna struggle to form a nice tight head. And that's one thing a lot of gardeners struggle with is they say, my cabbages are just kind of like forming these really loose leaves. It's not really forming a head. I look at the picture and the very first thing I can tell is it's in the shade. I ask, how much sun does it get? And they say, I don't know, maybe 3 to 4 hours. Well, that'll do it. That's exactly why. So if you don't get sunlight right, you can get everything else right and it doesn't matter. So make sure you get sunlight right. Give them nice full sun, direct sun if you can give it that, for 5 to 7 or even more hours, and they're not going to complain. So that is the next most important thing. And the final thing that is really important to growing cabbages has everything to do with the season that you plant it. All right, the final thing I want to talk about is the seasons in which you're planting your cabbage and the seasons between varieties. So if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, let me break this down. So when it comes to your planting seasons, you can plant in 2 different seasons of the gardening season. You can plant in the spring for a summer harvest, and you can plant in the late summer for a fall harvest. And we'll be doing that basically right now. We have our cabbage in the ground, and it's gonna be ready to harvest right around the early to maybe mid part of July. But then there's gonna be a gap of time where we're not gonna be planting anything because it'll be too hot. And then around probably late August, very early September, we're gonna put seeds in pots, if not directly in the ground, and we're gonna be growing those for a late fall harvest. Basically late fall, almost basically early winter. There'll be snow on the ground, but we're gonna be harvesting these beautiful heads of cabbage. It'll be one of the last things we're pulling out of the garden. And it's a very simple way to grow 2 successions of cabbage in one growing season. So that's kind of seasonally how we plant cabbage. But then there's also seasonality between varieties as well. So there's known as a early season cabbage, a mid-season cabbage, and a late cabbage. And that basically just coincides with how many days it takes for the cabbage to form a head. And so you have early cabbage varieties like the Copenhagen market cabbage, that's an early variety. You have a Wakefield cabbage, right, which is a mid-season variety. You have a, it could be like a late flat Dutch cabbage, right? That's a later variety. Early season varieties will mature in right around 65 to 70 days. Mid-season varieties are going to be right around 70 to 75 days. And then a later variety is going to be right around 80 to 85 days. And so that also can kind of help you out when you're picking the varieties that you want to choose, because right now, basically the world is our oyster. We can plant early, mid, and late season cabbages. However, as we get closer to planting fall cabbage, we're not going to be planting late season cabbages because we don't have enough time to get those to fully mature and form a head. So we're going to be exclusively planting our early season cabbages. And knowing this and having this information in your back pocket can really help you out to not only maximizing how much cabbage you're growing, but having more success growing cabbage. So those are all the things that I wanted to condense into today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments box down below if you want to see other MIgardener redos and what you'd like to see redone. We've done over 1,500 videos, and I can safely say that in the 11 years I've been doing this, the information has stayed the same or very close to the same, but the video quality and my public speaking has improved exponentially. So definitely let me know what you'd like to see redone. I don't ever want to have information that you don't want to watch because it's too terrible of quality. And so just let me know and I'll be happy to do that. So as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care, guys.